Okay. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. I hope this is kind of a new thing we're doing. So let's go ahead and get started praying. We'll get started on Daniel chapter 6, part 3. We'll be finishing up the chapter this morning. So again, this is kind of unique. This is kind of a first for Beth Haven, I think. I don't know the last time that we did this. I think we did the lockdowns, but they were at the fellowship itself. So yeah. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll go ahead and get started here. And all right, give me 1 second here as I adjust myself. All right, let's go ahead and pray. Lord, thank you so much just for this opportunity. Thank you for this time. I pray, God, that this would be profitable and beneficial, even though we are all in separate places and doing things. And so trying to hunker down um, because of the weather. I pray, God, that this would be beneficial again and instructive, and that you would be glorified overall. Again, for it's in your son's name. Amen. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. So I've readjusted the timeline for Daniel. By the way, I sent Will notes. I don't know if he had a chance to send them out to you, although I sent them like 5 minutes ago. So if you do have some notes, you can and if he sent them to you, you can go in your email and follow along if you so choose. Okay, so we are in the middle of the Medo-Persian Empire, and of course, I adjusted the timeline here, um, kind of where we are right now. So we have Darius the Mede, who ruled between 539 and 538 BC, and I use that time period because I believe that it is associated with the Cyrus cylinder, with the individual Gobrias that is mentioned within that cylinder. During this time, he is around 64 to 65 years of age, respectively. Now, I got the timeline wrong for the end of Cyrus's reign, but that's all right. You get the fact that at the end of the Cyrus's reign, Cyrus the Great conquers Nabonidus and rules over Mesopotamia, and rules for 30 years. Um, um, he conquers Babylon in 539 BC. So he begins his reign in 559 BC, ends it in 529. At the middle of that, Darius the Mede becomes co-regent of the city and Babylon in place of Belshazzar, and Daniel is all in the thick of it. At the time that we are at right now, he's about mid-60s, according to the timeline. And again, we've been kind of aligning this timeline with the five kingdoms of King Nebuchadnezzar. Um, Nebuchadnezzar's empire has ended, and we are now in the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, in chapter 7, we're actually going to go back to this. We're going to reverse the clock back and go to the time of Belshazzar. We're going to go back to that in chapter 7. I'll try to give an explanation as to why I think that is, why I think that's important. But at this time period in chapter 6, we are smack dab in the middle of the Medo-Persian Empire, and of course the reign of Darius the Mede, who is the co-regent of Babylon, and Cyrus, who is the greater king of the empire. So last week we talked about the God of heaven rescuing and vindicating Daniel from the intrigue of the satraps and commissioners. That, to be honest with you, the punishment of Daniel was supposed to be for 30 days. Essentially, it was a death sentence for anyone who was thrown into the lion's den. Daniel they were targeting Daniel specifically, thus creating a new law that was not in the law previously, but basically deceived the king, that is King Darius, to create a law that essentially traps um, Daniel. Daniel, of course, was thrown into the lion's den, and although Cyrus acknowledges that the God of heaven would save Daniel, it was kind of interesting. He kind of still was overwhelmed with extreme concern as a result of that, which was kind of interesting. He ends up going the next day, not even waiting till the sun rises, to go and see if Daniel had been rescued, as it were. And it turns out that he had been. And come to find out, long story short, that he, of course, was tricked and deceived. Daniel was pulled out of the lion's den. The satraps, their children and their wives, were thrown into the lion's den. Or the commissioners and the satraps who were responsible for this. And of course, the lions tear them apart before they even hit the ground, which is kind of interesting. So by this action, the God of heaven revealed himself as true, not only to the satraps and commissioners who are now passed away, they are now deceased, dead due to the punishment that they received from deceiving the king, but also King Darius. Now, I mentioned last week that um, this chapter, as well as all of the other previous chapters, have more to do with the God of heaven than Daniel. Daniel is a supporting character or a supporting actor in this historical narrative. Okay, the main person in the spotlight is God. This is kind of underscored. This is underscored in chapter 1. This is underscored in chapter 2, of course, with the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. This is underscored in chapter 3 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and them entering into the fiery furnace. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of parallels between chapter 3 and chapter 6, and I would even say a little bit in chapter 4 as well. Um, Cyrus doesn't get it until this, right? And so let's go ahead and jump into Daniel chapter 6, verse 25. And then we will finish the chapter. And then let's go ahead and look at a couple of things here. So it says, Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in the land, may your peace abound. So after Daniel is rescued from the lion's den and basically gives credit to the God of heaven for doing so, Darius begins to write essentially a decree to all peoples, nations, and men of every language or tongue who were living in all the land. Let's take a look at this word nations right quick. This is very kind of interesting to me. The phrase, or the Aramaic phrase, is umaha, not Omaha. Okay, we're not talking about the state. Okay, umaha. Okay, this Aramaic word occurs 8 times in the scriptures, 7 times in the book of Daniel, once in Ezra, and it could be translated as nations, people, or tribes. Now, when we talk about nations, usually in our perspective, we've got the United States, we've got Russia, we've got Australia, we've got South America. We've got all of these separate individual places, right? With various people groups. That's not the way I think that this word is being used in terms of how it's understood in the text. I believe that that the word nations is being used to refer to as people groups or tribes within that region. Okay, so it's not nations as in like the United States, Canada, things like that. It is nations in a sense that there are people groups within that land living in specific places. For instance, in Genesis chapter 25, verse 26, by the way, this word corresponds to the Hebrew word that is spelled the same way, umaha, and means the same thing. In Genesis chapter 25, 26, again, this is interesting. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names. This is Abraham's son, according to Hagar. By their villages, by their camps, 12 princes according to their tribes. That's the same word that corresponds with the Aramaic word. Notice how they translated nations in Genesis 25. I believe, I'm sorry, in Daniel 6. I believe that Genesis 25 uh, uh, is more clearer. So I would say that, or clearer than just nations. So I believe that we're talking about various people groups within the region of Babylon and respectfully Mesopotamia. In Numbers chapter 25, verse 15, we see the same word here in Hebrew, corresponding with the Aramaic word. It says, the name of the Midianite woman who was slain was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur, who was the head of the people of a father's household in Midian. Again, the word people translated is that same word, Umaha. Right? So this could be translated tribes. I believe that that's more clear, or people groups rather than nations. Again, as there were other regions around Babylon with many other people groups under the authority of Babylon. Um, the, of course, you had Greater Babylon, but the rule extended way beyond that, right? As a matter of fact, if we take a look at this map, here you have Babylon, which of course is highlighted in red in that circle, and then you have Ur, which is south of Babylon. Again, that's where another group of people live, and then you have Nippur, which is where another group of people live. You have Opus, which is right next to Babylon, right? That's where another group of people live. Then you have Gozan, Haran, Karashmish, Aleppo. You have all of these various areas and all of these various groups, right, that live within the Babylonian Empire. So I would say that it's not talking about necessarily nations, because remember, Darius is the co-regent of Babylon. He's not the greater king. He's not Cyrus. This is an edict that's coming from the basically the steward of the Babylonian Empire, right? So it's not necessarily nations as we understand it. I believe that it's more that people groups or those that reside within the empire under Darius's reign. Okay, verse 25. Then Darius the king again wrote to all the peoples, the nations, and the men of every language who were living in all the land, may your peace abound. Again, Darius the king addresses all those who live under the authority of Babylon, not outside of that, which is interesting. Individuals, that is peoples, nations, tribes, or people groups, and many languages or tongues, and promoting their peace or well-being. May your well-being abound. Essentially, it's a greeting, right? So again, Darius is addressing everyone who lives and resides within the particular area or region of Babylon. Okay. Okay. Let's look at verse 26 here. It says, I make a decree that in all of the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. For he is a living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. Again, fascinating here language. Let's take a look at these Aramaic words in red. Decree dominion in my kingdom, for to be specific. The Aramaic word decree is tahame. This Aramaic word occurs 25 times in the scriptures and 7 times in the book of Daniel. It means, again, a decree, a command, or an order, or a judgment, or an evaluation of something. So when someone evaluates something and then they make when someone observes something and then they make an evaluation based upon that observation, particularly a king or someone in high authority, that would be considered a judgment or a tahame. Okay? This word is used of establishing a law um, making a law or highlighting a law that has been established throughout the land. And since this particular decree that Cyrus has made is not found in any sort of Aramaic law prior to this, Darius is now establishing a law in Babylon to recognize the God of Daniel. That's pretty incredible, right? Because before this, there was no law established. Nebuchadnezzar just recognized the God of Daniel, or the God of heaven, whom he calls it, and that word was extended throughout the kingdom, throughout the Babylonian kingdom as well as abroad, right? Um, Darius makes it a point to establish a law, a decree, right, in the region of Babylon itself, right? In Daniel 3:10, again, concerning the Chaldeans, okay, this word is used of Nebuchadnezzar, okay, and is expressed by Nebuchadnezzar's rulers and leadership regarding Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He says, "You, O king, have made a decree to hum it, that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, and the bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image." Again, this is found during the fiery furnace, during Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's um, 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 basically their order to bow down before Marduk. We see the same word used, decree, in chapter 3, verse 29. Concerning Nebuchadnezzar, it says, "Therefore I make a decree that any people or nation or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb." Notice the difference here, by the way. Nebuchadnezzar makes a decree that any people group, any individual people group or tongue, right? Again, kind of same language here as Darius, that speaks anything offensive, that speaks anything offensive. He didn't say anything about worshiping him. He said, if it speaks anything offensive, because remember, Nebuchadnezzar still thought Marduk was the premier god until we get to chapter 4, right? So if anybody speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they shall be torn limb from limb, and their house be reduced to a rubbish heap. Right. So Nebuchadnezzar makes a decree not to say anything offensive or say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but he doesn't promote the worship or the bowing down to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Um, which is kind of interesting. Darius actually promotes this. He says, "I make a decree that in all your dominion of my kingdom, that men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel." That is very different than this. Okay? Now, remember a previous point, right? If in the Persian Medio Empire, once a decree is given by the king, or one who has authority of the king, it cannot be canceled, it cannot be annulled, it cannot be revoked. So, this edict, this decree given in Babylon cannot be removed, it cannot be changed, it cannot be rejected. That men were to fear and tremble, we'll talk about that in a minute, before the God of Daniel. This again, this is an incredible scenario, an incredible scene here. Okay? Let's continue here talking about this. So he makes a decree that that in all of the dominion of his kingdom, that is Darius's kingdom. Dominion is the Aramaic word shotan. This word occurs 14 times in the scriptures. This word only occurs in Daniel. It doesn't occur in Ezra. It only occurs here in Daniel, okay, between chapters 2 and 7. It is translated as dominion, sovereignty. You could even translate it rule too. That would also be proper as well. And this has everything to do with the influence and authority that a person, typically a ruler or one in an authoritative position, has over a region or a land and the people that dwell in that region, right? Which makes sense because again, Darius is the co-regent of the region or the land of Babylon. Right? There's probably again, you have the satrapies and everything else like that who are co-regents of cities and districts and city towns and states and things like that. But he is the overall ruler of all the people that dwell within the region of Babylon. Darius underscores the extent of this decree by using the Aramaic word malku with the pronominal yod. That there's that yod in the first person singular pronoun, which is translated my kingdom. That's where we get that. So malku is kingdom. That yod at the end of this word here is in the first person singular pronoun, hence my kingdom. Okay. This underscores that this command extends in Babylon, in the Babylonian Empire, but not the entire Persian Media Empire. Remember, Cyrus is the greater king of Persia, of the Persian Media Empire. He is the steward or the co-regent of Babylon. Again, which is why I said it only applies to Babylon, but does not extend beyond that. Right. Again, it kind of makes me wonder too. When Cyrus actually conquered Babylon, he just kind of gave it to Darius just to kind of steward. He wasn't really concerned. I mean, I believe that Cyrus, wanted the region to be preserved, of course, but I think he didn't. He's just said, I conquered it. You run it. As long as they're not uprising against me or anything else like that, you can do what you want. So Darius is ruling, of course, with Cyrus's blessing. Let's continue on. Chapter 6, verse 26. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. Let's take a look at these two words here, fear and tremble, because this is interesting. We find this. Um, it kind of reminds me of Philippians 2 kind of deal. But let's take a look at this word here, fear. Dekal is the Aramaic phrase. 6 times it occurs in the scriptures. It only occurs here in the book of Daniel. It does not occur anywhere else in the scriptures. It is translated as fear or terrible. Now, terrible we usually use as a qualitative term if something is poor or lame or whatever the case like that. Man, it's a terrible movie, right? But that's not what we're talking about here, right? Terrible kind of refers to a state of being where one is kind of trembling before something. They're afraid, they're paralyzed, things like that. The stem of this word is in the pau stem, and the type is participle active, which underscores that this is not just a physical response. He's not talking about just shaking and quaking before God. That's not what it means here in this particular context. Fear. It's rather a disposition or a person's perspective, right? That the gods of Babylon were revered for the activity that they can do with men, right? So they were given high standing in the minds of individuals, right? Things were written about them. They had trinkets and things like that where they would acknowledge them and stuff like that. So it's not that they were to tremble, and stuff like that, but it was a disposition, a healthy reverence to this God, because this God, if you do not respect him, you could be dealt with, right? That's kind of the idea. tremble is the word zua. This occurs two times in the scriptures. It only occurs in the book of Daniel. Same thing as the word fear, the Aramaic word translated fear. And it means to tremble or shake. Again, this word is in the same stem as in the same type as the Aramaic word fear. It underscores not just a physical response. We're not, imagine millions of individuals in the region of Babylon, trembling and shaking everywhere as they go. It's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, again, a disposition, a person's perspective, their outlook, their state of being, right? That they are to have a healthy reverence and respect for the God of Daniel, right? Where at first, again, the commissioners did not acknowledge him, the satraps did not acknowledge the God of Daniel. Even Cyrus, to some extent, he acknowledged that God could save Daniel, but he didn't promote it to the general populace, so to speak. Right now, he's doing that, which clearly goes to show that Darius has a healthy respect and acknowledgement of the God of Daniel, because not only did God save Daniel, which I think it is made clear within the text, but God also punished the satraps and the commissioners by way of throwing them into the lion's den and allowing the lions to essentially consume them and dominate them, right? Um, So Darius wrote that all humankind under his rule, under the rule of Darius, ought to respond with honor and respect to the God of Daniel, to be mindful of their speech, to be mindful of their activity. Okay. This is, again, pretty incredible, because this is the second time that a king has acknowledged um, the God of heaven. The first one was Nebuchadnezzar. The second one is Darius, now here. Okay. Again, it was the co-regent of Babylon. It is here that Darius begins to give the qualifications and nature of the God of Daniel. This is why you ought to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. He's getting ready to give the qualifications, the characteristics of God, as to why he ought to be honored and respected among men in Babylon. Now, I think that I think I'm convinced that if Darius was not the co-regent and he was in the place of Cyrus, I think this would have went all throughout the kingdom, similar to Nebuchadnezzar, because of what uh, Darius acknowledges about God is similar to Nebuchadnezzar. Let's go ahead and take a look. Daniel chapter 6, verse 26. Let's go ahead and read verse 26 here. It says, "For I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever." Amazing statement, of course, by Darius, but what we find is this is not a new statement. God, Darius the king acknowledges the God of heaven is living already. He already acknowledges this reality in verse 20. Okay. So why is he acknowledging it here? Because this is a decree that is going out to everyone in Babylon. He is the living God, in contrast to the false deities that essentially have been reestablished by Cyrus. Remember, Cyrus came in and essentially co-opted Marduk, right? Again, this battle is against God and Marduk. Again, God is laying waste to Marduk again. Which is amazing, right? So he is the living God, the living God. There is no other God that has this quality as the God of Daniel. Now, what's interesting is this is a similar statement that King Nebuchadnezzar makes in chapter 4. If we were to take Darius's statement and compare it to chapter 4 of Nebuchadnezzar's statement, we find that they're strikingly similar. Okay? For one, in verse 34, Nebuchadnezzar of chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the God and Daniel's God and his qualities that he is living. It says, but at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. It's interesting. He honored him who lives. Again, we talked about that in chapter 4, that the language of that is very, very important. That Nebuchadnezzar is turning his back on Marduk and the Enuma Elish, right? Acknowledging that the God of heaven is the one who lives, not Marduk, which is kind of interesting. Darius again says the same thing. He is essentially going against Marduk, who has been established by Cyrus, basically to underscore Cyrus's power. And if you recall, when we looked at the Cyrus cylinder, the priests of Marduk were very pleased that he did that. Basically reestablished Marduk in Babylon, the city of Babylon. So what Darius is doing is kind of amazing here. That he's acknowledging again that he's reestablishing essentially that God is the living God of the Babylonians. The Aramaic word that is used in both statements by both kings is the Aramaic word kahali. Both kings recognize that the God of heaven is living, who exists, right? Again, this is in contrast with the false deities that do not exist. They are not alive. They are not living, right? So this is amazing. So both kings acknowledge with the same word in Aramaic that it is the God of heaven who is living, who exists among men. And that makes him, again, not just the God of Israel, but the God of Babylon, the God of the Babylonians, the God of the Persians, the God of the Medes. He is the one. Okay. Verse 26. Let's continue. Again, I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and enduring forever. Again, Darius also acknowledges not only the existence of the one true God, but the eternality of the God of heaven. Once more, this is underscored in King Nebuchadnezzar. If we go back to chapter 4, we see the same statement that is made by Darius that is made by King Nebuchadnezzar that Darius makes himself. In chapter 4, verse 34, again, but at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. Right? That there is no beginning, no end to him. He is eternal. He is the ever-present one, the ever existing one. Right? Again, Darius's statement, we see same thing. Both kings use the Aramaic word alam. This is similar to the Hebrew word olam, which means without end, eternal, right? As a matter of fact, I believe the word olam is used as a kind of a name or a title for God. Both kings recognize that the God of heaven is not only living, who exists, but exists perpetually. There is no beginning or no end to him. This contrasts with the false deities that only exist in the minds of men, and the person of influence is conquered, that the God ceases to exist. Remember when Belshazzar came in and conquered, Marduk was gone, and the god of sin was entered into the temples and things like that. He tore down Enlil. He tore down, Marduk, and erected this god that they didn't recognize, right? Well, now that Cyrus is back, he tore down the god of sin, reestablished Marduk and Enlil, and things like that, right? Because when a leader comes in, they bring their gods with them, right? Or adopt the gods and just make them their own. In this case, God cannot be this, right? That no one brings him in when they conquer a land. He is the one who gives kingdoms and removes kingdoms, and this, that, and the other. Okay. Again, this contrasts with the false deities. These deities don't exist. They are not perpetual. They don't live forever. They cannot, because they're not alive. They're not living. So once again, this underscores that God is not only the God of Daniel and Israel, but he is the God of Babylon. He's the God of Persia. He's the God of Media. He's the God of men. Verse 26, let's continue. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. Well, that makes sense, right? If God is the only God that exists, and God is the only one that is eternal, whatever he establishes endures forever. Darius recognized that since the God of heaven is the only God that exists or lives, and what he establishes will not be overcome, destroyed, or passed to another ruler, that makes God the only God that exists, not in the minds of men, but in reality itself. Additionally, I also believe there's another point here to be made, that he's not talking about his dominion now. He's talking about his kingdom that will be established in the future, which means that Darius is privy to the information that Nebuchadnezzar had. I believe that, he's probably read it in the annals of the kings, because Nebuchadnezzar's annals are found in Babylon. He also has Daniel as well. Remember, him and Daniel were had a very, very good relationship. As a matter of fact, he's going to be made the third ruler of Babylon. So this also acknowledges the establishment of the God of Heaven's kingdom in the future. This is also similar to Nebuchadnezzar's statement in chapter 4. We read here in chapter 4, verse 34, and the Most High is praised and honored in him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures for generation to generation. Again, this is not talking about now. God's kingdom is not established now. This is talking about when God's kingdom is established in the future, it will not be taken. It will not be overrun. It will not be given to another. It will endure perpetually, because God is the living God. Again, this is contrasted with Daniel's statement in chapter 6, verse 26. And again, both words, which is fascinating, both statements by both kings use the Aramaic word shotan. We talked about the word shotan, which is translated dominion or rule, right? Both kings recognize that the God of heaven is not only living, who exists and exists perpetually, but also his rule will be forever. His dominion will be forever, everlasting. Okay, we're making good time here. Chapter 6, verse 27. There's not really much to be said about this particular statement. Let's go ahead and read it, and then we'll make some observations here. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heavens and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Again, amazing statement here of Darius. Darius also recognizes that the God of heaven performs signs and wonders. Now, Darius has not seen any signs and wonders. I mean, I guess you could say that this was a sign and a wonder, right? I mean, in terms of Daniel being delivered from the den of lions, but he's not seen. He's not kind of seen. He's not seen what Nebuchadnezzar's seen, right? He hasn't had any dreams given to him, and things like that. Um, so how does he know this? I mean, this is kind of plural. He doesn't say that he delivers and rescues and performs a sign and wonder. This is plural. So what's the deal here, right? Well, Darius, I believe, is more likely to know the historical account of the signs and wonders that were done by the God of heaven in the previous empire. Remember, this is all this stuff is recorded, or at least spoken by Daniel. Okay, so he's either read this or Daniel has told him, being the chief of the Magi, by the way. And of course, we have individuals who have went through the kingdom as well. You have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even though they're not mentioned in the text, they're still there. So Darius acknowledges the signs and wonders that God has performed. Okay, this is very similar to Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, to the delivering of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the fiery furnace, to the personal experience of God, the God of heaven, impacting, I'm sorry, not Daniel's kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, okay? And the writing on the wall with Belshazzar and the explanation of that writing. I believe Daniel told Darius about that also. So in each chapter, 2, 3, 4, and 5, there's a sign, at least one sign and wonder mentioned within this chapter, the acts of God given to men for them to recognize that he is the true God of heaven and earth, right? And Darius again acknowledges this in his decree, signs and wonders. Okay? This is also very similar to Nebuchadnezzar's statement. It says, how great are his signs and wonders, how great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Again, very similar to Darius's statement. Both words in Aramaic that are translated signs and wonders, Ath and Tema, are used of Darius and King Nebuchadnezzar, both of them. Again, if we could take Darius's statement is short form of King Nebuchadnezzar's statement. Again, very similar. Both acknowledge that he is the living God. Both acknowledge that he can produce signs and wonders. He's the one that can produce them, not the false deities. They can't produce them. He's the one that does it. Okay? He delivers. He is the God who delivers physically. Again, which is fascinating. Amazing statement here. And then Darius recognizes not only the signs and wonders of the God of heaven who performs them, but specifically credits God himself that Daniel was physically rescued from the power or hand of the lions. The word power is the Aramaic word hand in the lion's den. He was rescued essentially physically from death, very similar to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. Very similar. So it shows that God is not only the God of heaven and earth, but he is the God who delivers men physically from destruction. It's very important, right? Particularly within the context of the false deities, Marduk and Leal, all of these false deities here that reside within the realm of Babylon. Darius the Mede does not give any credit to any of these gods in this text. He only gives credit to the God of Daniel who exists, who performs these signs and wonders, and whose kingdom will be eternal once it is established. It says, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and honor the King of heaven, For all of his works are true and his ways are just, and he's able to humble those who walk in pride. Both statements of the king acknowledge the specific work of God of heaven in a personal way. This impacted Darius personally. It's impacted him personally. And so he mentions it in verse 27, just like the act of God influenced Nebuchadnezzar in a very personal way. And so Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges this as well. Okay. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Um, the chapter ends in verse 28 with Daniel completing this particular chapter by writing that he had a prosperous and peaceful life in the kingdom of Darius and Cyrus the Great. The word success is peaceful, so it's prosperous. No, very little hostility. As before. Why? Because the kingdom of Persia acknowledges the God of Daniel, which is why he enjoyed prosperity or a peaceful life in the kingdom of Darius and Cyrus. Again, this more than likely included his promotion from a commander to third in command of the rule of Babylon. I believe he was exalted to be the third in command. Particularly after this. I mean, he had plans. Darius had plans to make him the third ruler anyway. But I think after this, I think it's a foregone conclusion that he was made the third ruler of the kingdom of Babylon under Darius the Mede and of course Cyrus. So again, which is incredible to think about. Because again, this has more to do not with Daniel's success, so called, but the fact that the God of heaven is the true and living God. And give me a few more minutes. You're gonna have to because I'm online and no one can do anything about it. So okay, give me a couple more minutes. Okay, so pertinent questions from chapter 6. Who is Darius the Mede? Darius the Mede was a ruler from Iran, I believe, who was Gobrias from the Cyrus cylinder, and is the co-regent of the ruler of Babylon under Cyrus the Great. I believe that's makes that clear. Okay. What is the law of the Medes and the Persians? Well, the law of the Medes and the Persians, if there was a king or a person who operated in the authority of the king, established the law, it could not be canceled or rejected or annulled. Again, this is observed in the book of Daniel, Ezra, and Esther. Okay. And then lastly, why is this historical account recorded here in Daniel? Well, it's very obvious that the purpose of this historical account is to underscore and acknowledge the God of heaven in the activity of the kings, as he is the influence and power among the people of his kingdom. Just like Nebuchadnezzar wrote his personal witness to the God of heaven concerning personal activity, and he wrote it all throughout the kingdom of Babylon, that men were to read it and acknowledge it. It is the same thing here. Darius is the ruler of Babylon. He has great power and influence, and he writes a decree basically to acknowledge, to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. And this extends throughout the entire region of Babylon. And once again, this has to do with Babylonian history and the people that live within Babylon. Okay. To sum up, just like all the other works of the God of heaven, this is to make known to the kings of Babylon, as well as humanity that resides in Babylon, and I would even say extended outward, that the God of heaven is the God of the Babylonians, the God of the Medes, the God of the Persians as well. Okay. And he's using Daniel to highlight that, to underscore that, right? So I think that is I believe the extent of this chapter here. Okay, next week, weather permitting, and all of that good stuff, we are onward to chapter 7. I'm telling you right now, we're going to be in chapter 7 for a good while, probably for the next couple of months. So, get ready, because there is a lot of good details, lots of things going on in chapter 7. So we'll be in there for a minute. All right. Let's go ahead and pray, and then I will close out this hour. And I will catch you along with Willie B next hour. So let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll close. Lord, thank you so much for technology. That the fact that even though the weather is kind of inclement here and somewhat problematic, that we can still get the teaching in and get it in, and that is a good thing. That we're all learning about you, that you are indeed the main source of life. You are the all existing one. You are the one, the living God, and the one who will establish his kingdom, and it will endure forever. Thank you again so much for who you are and for giving this account to Daniel to record for us so that we may know and marvel at your works and your activity and everything that you do. What's in your son's name? Amen.